My mom is beside herself. I don't think she's ever had a Thanksgiving skipped in her life. So she doesn't know what to do with herself.
That's I think the situation with all of us. My parents are, you know, kind of resigned to the fact that no one's going to see them for a long time.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. All right, so it's now 1:01. I think we should go ahead and get started. Everybody can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Can I get a thumbs up from all the presenters? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Council on Public Transportation and the Multi-State Transit Technical Assistance Program. We're welcoming you to the Technical Initiatives Forum. Today's topic, the State DOT check-in on PTASP development. Thanks for joining us. We greatly appreciate your involvement. For this particular Technical Initiatives Forum, our moderator is Jennifer DeBrule. She's Vice Chair of MTAP, as well as Chief of Public Transportation for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. And I will now turn this forum over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a very timely topic for us to talk about public transportation agency safety plans as we approach the deadline with FTA. I know all of us have been working really hard on these plans over the past few years. Here in Virginia, we've got some experience because we are, state safety oversight for the Tide Light Rail system. But for the non-SSO types, this was really a big shift for us to jump in and to do a state-sponsored safety plan for the 15 Tier 2 transit agencies in the Commonwealth. And we did do that in Virginia. We did do the state-sponsored plan. All of our Tier 2 agencies opted to remain in the state-sponsored plan that we were able to complete back in July. So I know for us, it's timely to have this conversation with FTA because we're in that nice little middle ground between finishing our PTASP and our picking up and getting ready for our state management review, which has been rescheduled from this fall into the winter. So I think this is a great discussion, a very timely discussion that means a lot to the states, and really appreciate Candace Key from FTA coming to be with us today to give us that federal perspective. Perfect cue, Richard, to go over very briefly today's agenda. We do have an update from FTA's perspective. We have Candace Key here with us. She's the Director of the Office of System Safety. So excited to hear what Candace has for us today. And then I think it's always helpful whenever we can share amongst ourselves, amongst the state DOTs, what we're working on and how we're moving forward to accomplish this requirement. So we do have 3 presentations today. We have Nick Baldwin from PennDOT, Brian Travis from California DOT, and Joni Rosler from Missouri DOT. So they're gonna, after we wrap up with Candace, we're gonna go into those presentations. And then we're gonna make sure we save some time towards the end to have an open discussion amongst the MTAP community about what challenges we're facing as we approach the deadline, and how we're gonna make sure that we attain that compliance that I know we're all shooting towards. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Candace and let her provide the update on behalf of FTA. So Candace, thanks for joining us today.
Candace, before you get started, let me just say one thing for the members who are online with us. Feel free to use the chat function to send me questions in advance, or just to get a conversation started around PTASP, or use the Q&A function. And Candace will take questions after her presentation. Thank you. Sorry, Candace.
No problem. Thanks, Richard. And good afternoon and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. If you hear some yelling in the background. It's my 8-year-old daughter who's on a break from school, and she's in a Zoom play date with her friends. So as was mentioned, my name is Candace Key, and I'm the director of FTA's Office of System Safety. And in that role, I oversee the design, development, and implementation of safety policies, regulations, training, and technical assistance, including our efforts to support the transit industry's compliance with the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan regulation, which is why I am here with you all today. Next slide. So just briefly today, I will be discussing the impacts of COVID-19 with respect to PTASP, provide you with an update on compliance, discuss some available technical assistance, and also discuss some lessons learned from our review of some state submitted agency safety plans and template agency safety plans. Next slide. All right, so let's start by discussing COVID-19 and the transit industry. And as you all know, the industry continues to face many challenges related to the public health emergency, including reduced ridership, lower service levels, and limited financial resources. These challenges can make it more difficult for the industry to spend time and resources necessary to meet the PTASP requirement and certify compliance in trams with the PTASP regulation. So as a result of those challenges, earlier this year, FTA issued a notice of enforcement discretion, which essentially said that we would not take any enforcement action against a recipient that was required to comply with the regulation until after December 31st, 2020. So if you participated in our webinars and been on our technical assistance page, then you would be aware that PTASP compliance is a condition of assistance. So, but for FTA issuing this notice of enforcement discretion, if an agency or a state hadn't certified by July, they would have been ineligible to receive FTA grant funds until they completed that certification. So the notice effectively extended the deadline to December 31st of this year. And I'm going to be discussing on the next couple of slides where we are with compliance. Next slide. Next. All right, so despite challenges from COVID-19, states and transit providers continue to make progress towards compliance with the regulation. We monitor the industry's progress on a regular basis through our review of certification in trams and through our outreach to the transit industry through the PTASP Technical Assistance Center. So as of November 12th, 61% of applicable transit providers have certified compliance with FTA's PTASP regulation. So that's 429 of the 705 states or recipients that are required to complete that certification in trams. 47% of state DOTs that are not also 5307 recipients, 18 out of 38 have completed their certification in trams for PTASP. Next slide. And as for total state certification, so this includes both states that receive the 5307 funds and those that do not. You can see on this map that 26 of applicable states have already completed their certification in trams. So this is 26 out of the 50 states that are required to certify. Next slide. Next. So moving on to technical assistance, as I mentioned, we have supported the industry through our Technical Assistance Center in a number of ways. We have conducted webinars. We had been on a workshop tour, if you will, prior to COVID, where we were visiting all the regions and conducting in-person trainings. And through all of those efforts, we've actually been able to have contact with every state and recipient that's required to comply with the PTASP regulation. All right. So just a little bit more on what technical assistance we provided. Since launching the Technical Assistance Center in October of 2019, we've assisted over 2,000 DOT and transit agency representatives, including conducting over 40 webinars on a variety of PTASP topics with over 6,400 attendees. We've made available over 60 guidance documents, including sample ASPs. And these are located on our PTASP Technical Assistance Center website in the resource library, which is organized by agency type. And the link for that is at the end of my presentation. We've resolved more than 1,300 technical assistance requests from states and transit providers, trained over 1,200 state and transit personnel through 21 day-long PTASP workshops, and published 20 biweekly guides to resources and FAQs on specific PTASP topics. So as you can see, we've been very busy trying to ensure that the transit industry has all of the information that it needs in order to meet the regulatory requirements. There's literally a webinar or a document on every single requirement in the rule. So again, the resource library is a great place to look for if you have questions about what a requirement is, or strategies you may use or approaches to how you can meet the requirements. Next slide. So as some of you may know, the Technical Assistance Center offers voluntary agency safety plan reviews. These reviews, as I mentioned, are voluntary and they're conducted by our contractors. They do not represent FTA's approval of an agency safety plan. Our contractors use a checklist that's actually on the website to compare the draft plans to the regulatory requirements. To date, the TAC has reviewed 12 voluntarily submitted state DOT developed ASPs, agency safety plans, or ASP templates that represent over 131 individual small transit providers. The TAC also conducts one-on-one sessions with the states and the small providers to review results and support ASP development. And next, I'll be discussing lessons learned from these reviews of the state DOT submitted plans. All right, so the first lessons learned is related to authorities and activities. Throughout its ASP review process and as part of our ongoing technical assistance to the industry, we've identified a few high-level lessons learned for compliance ASPs. First, whether developed by a state or a transit provider, the ASP should clearly define and is required under the regulation to define the authorities, accountabilities, and responsibilities for SMS in the transit agency. Specifically, the plan should define these authorities, accountabilities, and responsibilities for several roles defined in the regulation. the accountable executive, the chief safety officer or SMS executive, agency leadership, and key staff. States developing ASPs for small bus transit providers in their jurisdiction should be sure to identify these accountabilities, authorities, and responsibilities and include them in the ASP. Coordinating with the providers, such as through a teleconference or asking them to confirm or identify these requirements in their organization, can help create an ASP that accurately reflects the provider's operations and capabilities. The ASP also should explain how the transit agency will carry out SMS requirements, including for safety management policy, safety risk management, safety assurance, and safety promotion. Specific steps, activities, handoffs, and timelines may be included to document how these processes will be carried out and how they relate to each other. States developing ASPs for small bus transit providers should work with these providers to document these activities, again, to ensure that they're documented accurately and to ensure that they reflect the operator's capabilities. Next slide. All right. The agency safety plan should describe a comprehensive safety training program for all workers, both contractors and employees, who the agency designates as directly responsible for safety in the agency's transit systems. Some states may choose to incorporate training curricula by reference. Instead of listing out the training for every job category or position, they designate as directly responsible for safety. Incorporating training information by reference may be useful for states that are drafting plans for small providers, as they may not be as familiar with the provider's operations and training needs. The ASP also should describe how the transit agency communicates with all workers to inform them of safety information relevant to their jobs. This includes people who are not designated as directly responsible for safety. It applies to all workers, both contractors and employees. States working with small providers may pay special attention to training and communication requirements, as these provide the foundation on which an effective safety management system is built. Finally, the ASP should describe processes that reflect the definitions provided in the PTASP regulation. For example, although the agency does not have to copy the definition of the term hazard in their ASP should address all elements of the definition of hazard established in the regulation. And next slide. All right, so many of you, many states have opted to develop a template that they distribute to the small providers within their jurisdiction. This can be a great way to allow those providers to provide input into their ASP and to ensure that it better reflects their capabilities and operating realities. It is important to note that the state is still ultimately responsible for developing the compliant ASP. So even if you provide a small provider with the template, the state is responsible for ensuring that that template is completed to meet the requirements of the regulation. The state may want to require the provider to return the completed ASP template ahead of the compliance deadline to allow the state time to review and confirm that it is complete and meets the regulatory requirements. This also allows the state time to ensure that the ASP has obtained the necessary approvals that are required under the regulation. And next. Last but not least, all states with applicable small transit providers must complete the PTASP certification in trams by the compliance deadline. As a state making this certification, you are certifying that you have complied with the regulation. And this means that you have developed an agency safety plan that meets the regulatory requirements for any small public transportation provider in your state that has not opted to develop its own ASP. You should not complete the certification until you are certain that all of the regulatory requirements have been met for the small providers in your state, including, as I noted, signatures that are required by the accountable executive and board of directors. A recipient of Section 5307 funds that passes the funds to a transit provider will certify on that provider's behalf. And so it may be the case that there's a small provider in your state that is a pass-through recipient, but because they're small, would have been eligible to have the state develop their plan. Even if they opt out of the state developed plan and they're drafting their own plan, the state would be required to certify on that provider's behalf. And then lastly, last slide, any questions? I don't know if we're taking questions now or at the end, but I definitely am available for questions. I think there's one more slide. Yes. You can find more information about the lessons learned and other PTASP topics on the Technical Assistance Center website, as I mentioned. The website also includes a community of practice where you can share and discuss how your development of your ASPs are going and ask questions and get advice from your peers. And you also may contact the Technical Assistance Center via phone or email and request the voluntary review of your draft plan or any portion of the plan that you may have ready for review. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Candace. I know you've got a time constraint this afternoon, so I think we're going to go ahead and take questions for Candace before we go on to our states panel. I've got a couple that are popping up in the chat. Richard, do you want me to go through those, or do you want to go through those?
I'll start with Fred Butler from New Hampshire. It states, if a state owns vehicles but contracts out the service for those for which those vehicles are needed, do both the state as well as the contractor need PTASP plans, or can the state develop one that applies to the contractor? Thanks.
Yes, thanks. So the requirement for the plan flows through the recipient. So it's up to the recipient to determine what the best approach to ensuring that all operations that they provide directly or through a contractor are covered by a plan. So that can be done either by having the contractor develop its own plan, which is ultimately the recipient's plan, or the recipient drafting a plan that covers those contracted services as well.
Now,
Does that answer your question?
Fred, does that answer your question? This is a meeting. So I'm just saying, this is also, we're using Zoom meeting for the purpose that the platform is flexible. You can use the chat function. You can mute and unmute yourself. And again, I want this to be a free-flowing conversation among members, because that is, I think, what we aspire to do on pretty much all of our meetings. But in answer to the question, Candace, Fred says, yes, that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
Don, I see you have a question. Is there something you want to ask?
Yeah, hi, Candace. Thank you for being here today. one of the questions I get about once a month, and I assume other folks do as well on this call, is from the rural systems. And basically they keep coming back and saying, oh, do I have to do it now? Oh, do I need to do one now? And so I haven't heard anything. And so I was just wondering if there's anything you can share about extending the requirements to the rural systems and when that may or may not happen.
Sure. So there have not been any conversations within FTA about extending the requirement. In the preamble to the regulation, there was brief discussion of this topic. And in short, what it said was if FTA were to apply the regulation to rural providers, that would happen through a notice and comment process, which in my experience has been lengthy, takes months and months. So you would definitely, have notice that FTA was considering that through a proposal, and it would follow, the normal rulemaking process. So we issue a proposal that's open for notice and comment. You have an opportunity to comment, and then we have to respond to comment and issue a final regulation or requirement.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions from any members of the audience?
This is Joni Rosler with MoDOT, and I just wanted to clarify something. The certification of compliance, is it the certifications and assurances in TRAMS, or is there an additional place where the certification needs to take place in TRAMS?
No, so in TRAMS how it has a list of 20 or so things you have to certify to, and there's a little box next to it. There's now a PTASP box.
Okay, we found that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I see something coming up in the chat. Question from Shirley Wilson, Mississippi. All 5307 large and small urbans in Mississippi have opted to do their own ASPs. But as I understand, we at Mississippi DOT will still have to do a certification in TRAMS of compliance. Is that correct? Is that correct?
So if the large urban is a recipient of FTA funds, so they're able to come into TRAMS and do their own certification, then no, the state would not be completing the certifications on their behalf. The state is only completing certifications on behalf of, they're certifying to two things. One, they're certifying that they fulfilled their responsibility as a state to develop those small provider plans. And then two, for those small providers that are not recipients, they are certifying that those plans are complete and compliant with the regulation. It's possible that a small provider could be a direct recipient or a recipient of FTA funds and have the ability to come into TRAMS and make their own certification. So they would do that to certify that they have their plans. But if the state drafted the plan for them, the state would be certifying that they have fulfilled their responsibility for drafting the plan. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but everybody's certifying that they have met their obligation under the regulation, and only recipients can do that.
All right, Jen?
All right, thanks Candace so much. That was really helpful. And I know that it really it always helps to hear from FTA and what you guys are thinking, and helps us plan accordingly. And I didn't say it earlier, but I also want to say thank you for all of the work of the Technical Assistance Center. I know they're physically located in Virginia, So we felt very close to them. Felt very close to them. They were extremely helpful and stayed in close contact as we worked on our plan. So really appreciate all of that.
Glad to hear it.
So at this point, we're going to transition over to our state DOT panel, and we're going to start with Nick Baldwin.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nicholas Baldwin. I'm a program manager with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation at our central office in Harrisburg, where it's currently snowing slightly. I have been tasked with managing the safety initiatives for public transit throughout the state. Next slide, please. All right, so our approach is this. So back last year when FTA issued the PTASP final rule, the department coordinated with an entity known as the Pennsylvania Public Transportation Association, and that is essentially the transit trade association in Pennsylvania, and they have a safety committee. And we coordinated with them to ascertain the state of the industry regarding safety, and we found that many agencies had system safety program plans, which were, some were very robust, some were very basic, but they did not necessarily incorporate SMS or the performance targets that are so critical to the PTASP final rule. So many of these plans, as I said, were basic, but they had sort of antiquated methodologies. Next slide, please. So as we consulted with the industry throughout the state, it was determined that the department would not really be the appropriate entity to draft a statewide plan, but rather the industry itself would benefit more if individual agencies drafted their own plan using a PennDOT provided template. So to do so, each applicable agency wrote a letter to the state indicating that they would draft and certify a compliant plan independently. Essentially, all properties opted out of a statewide plan. However, much of each plan's development was actually conducted by PennDOT through our template program. Next slide, please. So what we did is we decided to develop a template PTASP plan in-house. We didn't use any consultants. Employees involved were myself and a few others. We successfully completed several trainings provided by TSI and some other industry recognized training programs. Next slide, please. We analyzed and collected various documents that we thought might be helpful, including all the old agency SSPPs. We used FTA's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan template for bus providers, which is very useful, and of course, the regulation, which really formed sort of the backbone of our template. So we decided to use the structure and outline of the actual regulation itself as the primary resource, and that's what we used to structure our template that we drafted. Next slide, please. We also used the PTASP final rule from the Federal Register as much as possible. We borrowed language significantly and made changes mostly to make it grammatically correct. In many places, we cut and pasted out of the Federal Register. To clarify any more complicated concepts, we took language from FTA's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan template, the reference guide, which really was a valuable resource for us regarding the more complicated nuances of the plan. Next slide, please. We received a lot of technical assistance from one of our local providers, Lebanon Transit. We used their help to ensure that the language that we used in our template could be usable and was appropriate for small urban providers, your small urban 5307 providers. And then, of course, FTA's Technical Assistance Center for PTASP was absolutely instrumental in providing value-added suggestions, which we quite easily incorporated into our template. We were very grateful for that assistance as well. Next slide, please. After we drafted our template, we then had to introduce it to the providers as a whole across the state. I believe there's 15 to 20 of them. We offered a series of trainings to show how the agency should use the template and make it a value-added product for their operations. We emphasized the fact that though it's a template, agencies have to use real experience and a real thought-driven process to make it work for themselves. We did that, and then came several months of one-on-one technical assistance, a lot of phone calls, back and forth emails and such. Next slide, please. We found that some challenges that we had to overcome was ensuring that agencies across Pennsylvania understood that their old safety plans do not meet many of the requirements of the FTA final rule and safety, the new safety management system structure. That fact took a little bit of time to sink in with not only the department, but also transit agencies across the state. But I think we overcame that. Another challenge that we had to overcome was how to develop a document that meets all requirements, but is still usable by every agency. So there were things that we explored with the agencies regarding collective bargaining unit arrangements. There were some agencies that subcontract service, so their plan might have looked a little bit differently when I was providing technical assistance to them. We learned that we as a state had to pressure transit agencies to get started working on their plans early on, not to wait to the last minute. And we also had to really help agencies massage the template if they subcontracted service. Many of those plans took a feel more of an oversight document than an actual PTASP plan. Next slide, please. I don't know, are we going to do questions now or are we going to hold off, Richard?
I think we'll go through the presentations and if we'll take them at the very end.
Okay, thank
So
you.
everybody hold your questions, hold your fire. We'll continue through all the presentations. And sorry, now you can see me. And then we'll take everything at once. And so thank you, Nick. I appreciate it and very much appreciate your availability and PennDOT's availability to be part of this check-in. So next up, Mr. Brian Travis from Caltrans. And I will turn the mic over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Can everybody hear me? Okay, my name is Brian Travis. I work for Caltrans in the Division of Rail and Mass Transportation under Wendy King. Next slide, please. Today I'm just going to give a kind of a quick rundown, not go into as much detail, but before I do, I would like to say that a lot of the things Nicholas described, we ran into here in California as well. We did have a lot of agencies that had some sort of a safety plan on file, and they wanted to lean into that, but we needed to make sure that their plans met the requirements of the rule, and so we really pressed agencies to take a hard look at what they're doing and then roll their information as appropriate into the template that was developed. And then I would also like to thank Pennsylvania, and I think I did kind of peg you, Nicholas, as somebody who should be speaking during this session, because Nicholas was instrumental in helping California get going in the beginning, because they were miles ahead of where we were at the time of template development. So I will be talking about the activities that we've taken to date to prepare agencies, some of the snags along the way, the current status where we're at with each, not with each agency, but kind of some statistics on where we're at with plan certifications. The current issues that we're going through, and then questions at the end. Next slide. So for activities to date, in the beginning, one of the reasons why we were kind of slow to start was because we were having a hard time identifying which agencies in California were small providers. And we actually struggled a little bit with FTA on that question, even though the information is all in TRAMS. We have a lot in California. And if I were to say there was one issue that was a struggle in California, it was herding cats. It was getting 70 agencies to all move in the direction of doing a safety plan. Once we got them on board and they understood the requirements and that it was a compliance area and that there was some shared responsibility between themselves and the state, I think things started to really take off. Sorry. So then what we did was we worked with FTA Region 9, and we worked with our transit association, the California Association for Coordinated Transportation, and we developed a work plan where, well, here, let's go ahead and I'll just go through these and then we'll go on to the next slide. But so we developed a work plan, and then we developed the Caltrans agency safety plan with Pennsylvania's help, and also with Santa Cruz Metro's help, and with the help a little bit of CalAct. And then we went through a series of educational and technical assistance venues. We're doing plan reviews now, and working with the PTASP Technical Assistance Center, and we're working on plan certifications. So next slide. So again, identifying responsibility was difficult for us. We had some concerns about the legal ramifications of developing safety plans for, or a template for, transit agencies when they own and operate their own systems. But Region 9 helped us see the light, and so we moved forward with identifying who the operators were, and were able to get the template developed and then move forward with getting agencies off the ground and running. Another snag along the way was COVID. When COVID happened, we had an awful lot of agencies. Administrative staff got sent home. They were told to work from home. Many did not have the appropriate work facilities from home. I personally did not have a state-issued laptop and could not connect to work for almost 2 months. So when the FTA announced that they were pushing out the deadline from July to December 31st, I was ecstatic, and so were many agencies in California. So thank you, FTA, for that. That was a smart move, I think. And most recently, I've been kind of going through my list of agencies and trying to check to see where people are at and who's certified and who hasn't. And I'm noticing that we're running into the typical, we forgot to agendize this during November, December during the holidays. And so I'm pressing them to please, move forward, have a meeting and get this certified. It's important. Next slide, please. So in California, we have 70 agencies approximately. There are a few agencies that should be on the list but aren't because they haven't received 5307 funds for a few years and don't have any active grants. We know they're going to have to develop a plan in the future, but currently they don't. We have 49 agencies that have opted out of the state's template. 43 opt-out letters on file, 3 that are not sure if they want to opt out yet. 18 are using the state's plan. 28, and there's actually probably more than 18. I think a lot of agencies that opted out did use the state plan, but since they opted out, I didn't count them. These are the 18 that I will be looking at and certifying. 28 plans I have on record as certifying 29 are going to go to their board or council in November, December, and then 13 I need a status update from. And I think that 13 represents the agencies that are probably working from home or aren't checking their email as often because they can't get to work or what have you. But I do think that we are on target. Every agency that I've called so far is very well aware. The last webinar that we had with FTA Region 9 had almost 80 participants on it. So I know most of the agencies are well aware, if not all of them. So next slide, please. So our current issues, some of the things that I've been noticing in the review of the template are pretty simple things. The number one thing I'm noticing is that the accountable executive oftentimes is not named or identified in the agency safety plan. They might have signed it, but the name of the person is not actually in the plan. And oftentimes I can't even read the signature. So I won't accept that. I tell them they need to go back and they need to name the accountable executive in the plan, and then they need to sign it. And then just not signing the plan. They send me a draft and they want me to certify a plan before it's even signed or approved by their board. I'm still having issues because of COVID and then the holidays. So next slide, please. So to try to wrap this up, what I'm trying to do is collect the remaining opt-out letters from agencies that still haven't decided if they're opting out or not. I am getting a few technical assistance questions, but not very many. I do get the same question about whether or not rural providers are going to have to develop a plan. It seems like every time I get that plan, it's when I send out a notice saying, don't forget. And then some rural agencies will call and say, do we have to do this? So it's just not knowing or understanding, I think, at the rural level. And then just tracking certifications, safety performance targets, making sure that they are submitting their safety performance targets to us via submittal of their plans, but also sharing those plans with their MPOs. I think they're all well aware of that requirement, and I think the MPOs are actually contacting the transit agencies and requesting that information, as well as I'm pushing that information to be sent to the MPOs. So next slide, please. And that's all I have.
Brian, thank you so much. Appreciate as always, Caltrans' perspective on the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan rule, and it's in providing an update where things are going. But we will now hold questions for Brian, and we will move on. And if my mouse would work. Oh, and there's Brian's information. If you want to contact him, feel free. And now I introduce Joni Rosler from Missouri Department of Transportation. Joni, mic is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'm Joni Rosler, the Administrator of Transit for the Missouri Department of Transportation, and the Transit Division is located in the Multimodal Division. And multimodal, as you might think, includes transit, rail, aviation, and waterways. So that's the context. My presentation does have a lot of general information in it that I might go over kind of quickly, but it'll also go into the specifics of our involvement with the small bus systems, as well as how we are coordinating on the planning side. So next. So, those are the basics about the requirement, the deadlines. And as some of the other speakers have indicated, we were thrilled when we found out that the compliance deadline was extended to the end of the year, because last spring things were very challenging as far as communication and the transit agencies having to cut service and start to work remotely and things like that. Next. So what MoDOT did in preparation early in the process is we participated in the FTA webinars, attended a workshop in Atlanta in 2019, and then we also used MPTA, which is our Missouri Public Transit Association, our trade association, to outreach to the transit agencies to talk about the requirement and to, try to get it forefront on their minds, and as well as doing some additional outreach to transit agencies. We the MPTA, kind of in response to the issue, presented it was actually a workshop in fall of 2019 on PTASP, and the FTA Region 7 office helped with that workshop. And then for the big picture and working with the MPO process, we participated in planning partner meetings. Next. So, as basics, which modes? So, the bus modes, rail modes, and then you can go on to the next one.
All right.
And so the process of determining, which transit providers had a peak hour requirement of at least 100 buses per mode versus the ones that have less than 100 buses per mode. And for those that had a peak hour requirement of less than 100 buses per mode, did they receive Section 5307 funding or not? So like California, we did work with our FTA regional office, and just based on what we know, determine which agencies it would apply to. Because in Missouri, all entities that receive Section 5307 funding do deal directly with FTA for their grants, or they're a subrecipient to an agency that deals directly with FTA for their grants. MoDOT does not apply for any 5307 grants. Next. So I guess like Virginia and California, within MoDOT, the rail transit mode had already had a lot of experience through the state safety oversight program. And so those are peers in my office who focus on those with our 3 urban rail systems. And so those were kind of on autopilot. They were nothing that we really need. Next. And then same with the buses over 100, over 100 vehicle peak hour requirement. Those were on the way. Then the next one talks about the small bus mode, which, the transit agency still certifies compliance as part of the FTA annual certifications and assurances. And then the oversight process is the process that goes behind those certifications. Next. So in Missouri, the Section 5307 providers with a peak hour requirement of fewer than 100 vehicles per mode, there are 8 of them. And the ones in bold, Cape Girardeau, Columbia, Jefferson City, Joplin, and Southeast Missouri State University did not opt out. So those are the agencies that MoDOT or the state was responsible for producing plans for. The other 3, Independence, Springfield, and St. Joseph, those 3 opted out and produced their own plans.
Joni, are we on the right slide?
No, you need to go up 1. I'm sorry. You're several behind. I haven't, keep going. Keep going. There you are.
Thank you.
Yep. So our approach was to contacted the agencies in 2019 and set up conference calls, numerous conference calls, to some individual calls and some with the group of 5 to talk about the plans, talk about the specific requirements. For several of the calls, we invited the FTA PTASP technical assistance folks who were very, very helpful. And we provided the FTA technical assistance items like the sample small bus plan. Then there are a couple of versions of that. One of them actually linked to all the specific regulatory citations. And there were special documentation on coaching people how to set up targets. So we provided all that information, and we worked with them and we worked with them. And at some point we've decided to finally get contractor support because our folks needed a lot of handholding. It was challenging even before the COVID came. It just didn't seem to be on the transit agency's radar screen, especially since the reg indicated that it was the state's responsibility. So it was a challenge to begin to make progress. But I mean, I feel like the FTA technical assistance tools were very, very helpful. So next slide. So those are the basic plan components. I think we've talked a little bit about those components. You can go on to the next one. And then the target setting. Target setting was particularly challenging for our folks because of the small bus agencies we worked with. Most of them were really the more limited NTD reporters, so they didn't necessarily have the information for system reliability except what they had in their own records, which was challenging for some of them. Next. So all of our small bus entities are either direct subrecipients or subrecipients of FTA funding, none through MoDOT. The agency staffs tend to be small. Many roles are performed by one or two folks. So in developing the plans, figuring out how to divvy up the responsibilities and still have a notion of checks and balances required some creativity. It's surprising to me, some of the entities were unclear on mode definition. Like a fixed route system, you would think would always have an ADA complementary paratransit system to go with it, but some of them didn't get that distinction. So it was a good opportunity to work on clarifying some of that information. And then some of them had difficulty identifying data for target setting. Next. So the plan status of all 5 plans have been developed. 4 of them we sent to FTA PTASP technical assistance for a voluntary review, and we've gotten response back, which was very helpful. One of them, Cape Girardeau, we're kind of like our little heroes right now. Their plan has been adopted by the transit board and sent to the MPO. And so one of the things we're doing internally is just before we update our certification in trams, we're going to go through the checklist again to make sure we agree that everything's complete. But I thought I'd just mention a few of the things that comments that came back from the technical assistance review. So, our contractor, ourselves, and the people writing, the transit agencies, they know, well, do we provide the service or does the contractor provide the service? But when the FTA technical assistance folks looked at it, it wasn't clear to them. So, making sure that the plans are written in a way that is clear to a reader who's not familiar with your agency. Is it, who provides the service and how much is contractors, how much is the entity. The targets and the date the targets are sent to the MPO, to remember to have that filled in. Another item was that the ASP should clearly describe processes that the agency uses to monitor compliance and the sufficiency of operations and maintenance procedures. So things like, rules of compliance programs, internal audits, records reviews, observations, ride-alongs, all that kind of stuff. And also who is responsible for reviewing the results of monitoring and measures that will be taken if non-compliance or insufficient procedures are identified. Also, we received a comment about risk identification and development of mitigation processes using the risk matrix. And the risk matrix, I thought during the training that I took, was a really good mechanism for kind of analyzing the importance of different kinds of factors. And then also that training, our little systems are small enough that a lot of the safety focuses on drivers because the systems might not have mechanics or many other functions. And but the PTASP review recognized that training is not just for drivers. So another thing I just wanted to clarify also is that we had the plans specific, I guess, there are 5 different separate plans, even though we're responsible for them and our contractors working with each of those systems, it ends up being 5 individual plans, not one state plan for 5 systems. Next. So something, the MPO involvement is, I think everybody knows, the transit agencies are required to provide their targets and the MPOs to the MPOs, and that MPOs are required to integrate the performance targets somehow into their TIPs and STIPs that are updated after July 20th, 2021. And next, and so what this is right here is just a sample, I guess, MoDOT Fast Act monthly planning partner webinar. This is just a sample agenda. And one of the things that MoDOT started with the passage of MAP 21 is, and it's continued on through the FAST Act, is a process of working with the planning partners to address the planning performance measures of MAP 21 and FAST Act. And so kind of a shout out to Karen Miller, who in MoDOT's planning department coordinates that. So in the beginning with the transit TAM plan, we kept in touch with our planning partners through this collaborative mechanism. So as the PTASP requirement developed, we used this forum to continue the collaborative process to work with the MPOs and state planners so they could understand the requirements, and particularly in the case of the PTASP requirements, how different they were from other performance measures included in the FTA, FHWA joint planning regs. So next is, I think, my last slide. And contact information. And also I want to put in a little advertisement for the Missouri Department of Transportation Buckle Up Phone Down Initiative. You can click on that link and sign up yourself. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about MoDOT and the PTASP process.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamie and Brian and Nick. Appreciate all of you taking the time to participate on the panel this afternoon. So I believe now, Richard will correct me if I get off base, but we're going to transition over to our discussion question. And oh, wait a second, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Do we have any questions, Richard, in the chat?
None so far.
Okay.
But let's get ready to talk PTASP.
Let's talk PTASP. Okay, so this is discussion. And so that means we need to hear from you. We need, we've got a bunch of folks, 35, 36 folks on the call today. And so this is the time where we want to hear from you. So our discussion question is, with the deadline for submitting our agency safety plans quickly approaching, What challenges are you still experiencing with finalizing your agency safety plans for your smaller transit systems? For example, the ones with 10 or less vehicles versus the larger transit systems. And I will throw that out there. Richard might call on people if nobody talks.
You should absolutely, as moderator privileges is to call anybody on this meeting out, because everyone's gone dark. I can see your names, but I can't see your faces.
I'll be glad.
We will search you out.
Oh, now we're
glad.
getting people dropping off. Go ahead, Tony.
Well, I was just going to mention, because I meant to mention this, I'm still a little bit concerned that we have 4 entities that need to adopt their plans. And you would think that that should be no problem before the end of the year. But for example, Jefferson City Transit had to shut down their operations for 5 days because they didn't have enough healthy people to drive the buses. And then Columbia, Missouri's manager is in the hospital with COVID. So it's just a little bit nerve-wracking. You know, it's very sad. The pandemic has huge effects, and just getting to the finish line with those plan adoptions, to me is a challenge.
So Jen, let me be the bad guy. I'll start calling on people. How about Mr. Kevin Olinger from New Mexico? Kevin, tell us.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. I guess I would just echo that comment. We have, I guess we're still waiting on a couple of systems to formally adopt their plan. And it does seem like COVID is still kind of overwhelming their resources. So we are, we're doing what we can to help, but you can lead a horse to water, I guess, and you can't make it drink. Or maybe I've used the wrong analogy. Maybe they don't have the capacity right now.
This is Brian Travis in California, and I think leading a horse to water is a perfect analogy. I think we have done that in California, and I do think that because of COVID, there were a lot of agencies that shifted their focus. It went from developing safety plans and doing everything that we normally do to COVID and determining how they were going to dig themselves out of the hole, be it an operational hole or a financial hole, probably all of the above. But they had to shift back when things started to normalize for them in this COVID world. And I think we're getting there, but I do see that, there might be, 1 or 2 agencies in California that that struggle with this.
Fred Butler, what's going on in New Hampshire? Unmute yourself. Help us talk about your challenges. Fred, are you still there?
He left.
Well, I'm going to unmute him. Fred Butler, you're there?
Yeah.
You're unmuted.
I am here. Thank you. Yeah. My throat's a little bit hoarse after just going through that whole spiel that you just missed while I was on mute, but I'll try again. Yeah. The analogy is a good one, the leading a horse to water, because we have very few that we actually have to do, it turns out, being in such a small state. So that's a good thing. But there were a couple agencies that were hoping that we would just sort of hand them, spoon feed them some sort of a broad plan, and they would probably put it on a shelf and say, yeah, we got it. I don't think they were prepared for the amount of specificity that is involved. When we dive into their actual safety committee and hierarchy, and things like that. So it was definitely a learning experience for all sides involved. And I think they appreciate now the fact that this is not one of those that will be able to just be the initial heavy lift and then sit on a shelf. It's going to almost unlike the TAM. The TAM was pretty much a one-time heavy lift, and now it's sort of running smoothly. This will take constant updating and whatever documentation on an ongoing basis. So it's we're getting there though.
Leanna Humble, I see, has put a comment in the chat. But Leanna, I'm going to open up your, and I hope it's Leanna. I hope I'm getting that right. I'm going to open up your phone line. Talk to us about what challenges you're experiencing.
Well, can everybody hear me?
I can't hear you speak.
Yes.
And Leanna, where are you from?
I'm from Wyoming.
Where?
Wyoming.
Oh, well, please. Okay.
And I'm very new to this position. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood that everybody, all the agencies that use 5307 funding, as well as having less than 100 vehicles operating, those are the only ones that need to do an ASP, correct?
Do you want me to respond, Richard?
Let's go to Candace. Go to the videotape. Go to the expert. Miss Candace Key, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, Leanna, welcome to your new position. I would strongly encourage you to go to the Technical Assistance Center page because it has a bunch of resources, but the regulation applies to states and recipients and any operator that receives 5307 urbanized area formula funds. The state is required under the regulation to draft and certify agency safety plans on behalf of small public transportation providers. And that term, small public transportation providers, is defined in the regulation to mean any operator who operates, and you're going to want to go to the website because it's long and it's convoluted, 100 or fewer vehicles and peak revenue service across all fixed route modes or in any one non-fixed route mode. So again, I would encourage you to reach out to the TAC, the Technical Assistance Center, and go to the website. We have from our one-day trainings, our training guide on the website and a whole bunch of other materials. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have if you want to email me afterwards as well. But I probably just direct you to the TAC.
Okay, thank you very much. We actually contracted out for this, so I think everything is under control. I just need to check with one agency to make sure that they have theirs signed, and then I can get on to TRAMS and certify that.
Sounds good.
Are there others out there, or do I have to start calling on people again? Do I have to pick people out? I love doing this. How about Caitlin? Oh, I see Caitlin's there. Caitlin from Tennessee.
I knew you were going to call on me, so I just decided not to turn myself on. So we actually, I think we're in a good spot. We're kind of in the end of our process. We're starting to train the agencies through our consultants that helped us through the process. I think one of our biggest issues right now is that our main PTASP guy at TDOT was, who had worked on this with the consultants for the last year and a half, left TDOT about 2 months ago. And so the rest of us are kind of playing catch up, trying to figure out exactly what we need to do to finalize everything, and then what our role is moving forward. I think it might have been Fred that said, you know, this is not something that you do once and then it's set, and you know, there's a lot more involved, I think, than we initially expected in terms of follow-up after the plans are done. So that's really where we are now, is just training the agencies on what's in their plan and how to implement it, and then training TDOT people in terms of what we're expected to do and what our role is moving forward. I think we're in a good spot.
All right. I'm going to keep going around. My other favorite person. How about Mr. Mark Sprick? What's going on in Texas?
Hi, Richard. We don't have any challenges with getting our 38 PTASP certified. We certified the last one last week. We got the bulk of them done this past summer because about the time that FTA announced the extension of the enforcement deadline, we were closing in on having them finished through our contractor anyways. So most of our agencies finished by the July 20 deadline. I think we had 3 or 4 that dribbled in over the last couple months. I did notice that our state's not the correct color on the map. So I don't know why we're not certified in trams. I sent an email to my folks to see what is going on there, but we're done. We didn't experience very many problems getting this done. And I think it's because we had a contractor that we dumped everything on, and they did a really great job. It would have been really challenging for us had we have had to do it with our own staff, though. It was a lot of work. And again, like I think someone else mentioned, all of our 5307 agencies receive their grant fundings directly from Region 6. We just do the governor's apportionment, and that's it. So they're not, a lot of them are not used to working with us a whole lot. So it went better than I expected.
Jen, should I call one more person? I think we could end early. I know we budgeted until 3 o'clock, but I'm grateful that, you know, we've got through all the presentations. I think everybody did a fantastic job, and I think we're getting through this discussion part. But I see, how about right in the middle of the heartland, Mr. John Moore of Kansas DOT. John, what's going on in Kansas?
Hey, everybody. Not too much. I think our main development right now is just getting everything through to the MPOs. We have everything approved through each agency's board or commission. So really, it's just kind of that final step of sharing with the MPOs across the state. Some have been easier to contact than others, and primarily it's those folks that aren't used to sort of those in-between folks. We have a few smaller 5307s in the Wichita area that are sort of just outside the urbanized area, but within the MPO planning boundary. So those folks have participated in some activities with the MPO there, but just not used to the usual approval process when it comes to adopting performance targets, things like that. So that's really the only thing we've fallen into, but I think we're probably in a similar state of Texas as far as getting everything in order before the deadline. It seems like the most main thing that's been kind of lax is just the approval process that has taken a little bit longer than originally anticipated. So we're glad we kind of made that effort up front to get everything finalized, and going forward, we're just kind of waiting on those other processes locally. So.
I think we're good. I think John has had the last word.
All right. I think that's been, I think this has been a really helpful conversation, and I know I heard from many of us that we've really relied on good private consultant partners. I would say that has been the same for us in Virginia as well. This has been an interesting process to go through. And so with that, do we have any remaining questions? I think we're probably good. But if anybody has any last burning questions before we wrap this up, I'll pause just for a second. And everybody's super quiet. So that means we've done our job. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time to participate in the Technical Initiatives Forum this afternoon. As Richard indicated in the chat earlier, all of the materials are going to be posted online on the MTAP webpage. And I know Richard and Shane and the crew at ASHTO are always available for any questions or assistance that you might need. And with that, I think we're done. So thanks, everybody. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the winter meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.